Thanks for joining us here at Bedtime Stories to Sleep, where you can work hard and sleep hard. Just some quick housekeeping notes to remind you that we do not write these books, and these books are available in the public domain without copyright. Enjoy our stories that start with a story with graphic, peaceful video and moves on to a black screen to allow you to fall asleep and stay asleep. Sleep hard. And now, on to our story. If you'd like to listen to the full story, simply click the card above. Sherlock Holmes, Copper Beeches.
As the daughter could not have been less than 20, I can quite imagine that her position must have been uncomfortable with her father's young wife. Mrs. Rucastle seemed to me to be colorless in mind as well in feature. She impressed me neither favorably nor the reverse. She was an entity. It was easy to see that she was passionately devoted both to her husband and to her little son. Her light gray eyes wandered continually from one to the other, noting every little want and forestalling it possible. He was kind to her, also in his bluff, boisterous fashion, and on the whole, they seemed to be a happy couple. And yet, she had some secret sorrow. This woman. She would often be lost in deep thought, with the saddest look upon her face. More than once I have surprised her in tears. I have thought sometimes that it was the disposition of her child which waited upon her mind. For I have never met so utterly spoiled and so ill-natured a little creature. He is small for his age, with a head which is quite disproportionately large. His whole life appears to be spent in an alternation between savage fits of passion and gloomy intervals of sulking. Giving pain to any creature weaker than himself seems to be his one idea of amusement, and he shows quite remarkable talent in planning the capture of mice, little birds, and insects. But I would rather not talk about the creature, Mr. Holmes, and indeed, he has little to do with my story. I am glad of all the details, remarked my friend. Whether they seem to you to be relevant or not, I shall try not to miss anything of importance. The one unpleasant thing about the house, which struck me at once, was the appearance and conduct of the servants. There are only two, a man and his wife. Taller, for that is his name, is a rough, uncouth man, with grizzled hair and whiskers, and a perpetual smell of drink. Twice since I have been with them, he has been quite drunk, and yet Miss Rucastle seemed to take no notice of it. His wife is a very tall and strong woman with a sour face, and much less amiable. They are a most unpleasant couple, but fortunately I spend most of my time in the nursery and my own room, which are next to each other in one corner of the building. For 2 days after my arrival at the Copper Beeches, my life was very quiet. On the third, Mrs. Rucastle came down just after breakfast and whispered something to her husband. "Oh yes," said he, turning to me. "We are very much obliged to you, Miss Hunter, for falling in with our whims so far as to cut your hair. I assure you that it has not detracted in the tiniest iota from your appearance. We shall now see how the electric blue dress will become you. You will find it laid out upon the bed in your room, and if you would be so good as to put it on, we should both be extremely obliged." The dress which I had found waiting for me was of a peculiar shade of blue. It was of excellent material, a sort of beige, but it bore unmistakable signs of having been worn before. It could not have been a better fit if I had been measured for it. Both Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle expressed a delight at the look of it, which seemed quite exaggerated in its vehemence. They were waiting for me in the drawing room, which is a very large room, stretching along the entire front of the house, with 3 long windows reaching down to the floor. A chair had been placed close to the central window, with its back turned towards it. In this I was asked to sit, and then Mr. Rucastle, walking up and down on the other side of the room, began telling me a series of the funniest stories that I have ever listened to. You cannot imagine how comical he was, and I laughed until I was quite weary. Mrs. Rucastle, however, who has evidently no sense of humor, never so much as smiled, but sat with her hands in her lap and a sad, anxious look upon her face. After an hour or so, Mr. Rucastle suddenly remarked that it was time to commence the duties of the day, and that I might change my dress and go to little Edward in the nursery. 2 days later, this same performance was gone through under exactly similar circumstances, and I changed my dress, and again I sat in the window, and again I laughed very heartily at the stories of which my employer had immense repertoire, and which he told inadmittably. Then he handed me a yellow-backed novel, and by moving my chair a little sideways, that my shadow might not fall upon the page, he begged me to read aloud to him. I read for 10 minutes, beginning in the heart of the chapter, and then suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, he ordered me to cease and to change my dress. You can easily imagine, Mr. Holmes, how curious I became as to what the meaning of this extraordinary performance could possibly be. They were always very careful, I observed, to turn my face away from the window, so that I became consumed with the desire to see what was going on behind my back. At first, it seemed to be impossible, but I soon devised a means. My hand mirror had been broken, so a happy thought seized me. I concealed a piece of the glass in my handkerchief. On the next occasion, in the midst of my laughter, I put my handkerchief up to my eyes, and I was able, with a little management, to see all that there was behind me. I confess that I was disappointed. There was nothing. At least that was my first impression. At the second glance, however, I perceived that there was a man standing in the Southampton Road, a small bearded man in a gray suit, who seemed to be looking in my direction. The road is an important highway, and there are usually people there. This man, however, was leaning against the railings which bordered our field, and was looking earnestly up. I lowered my handkerchief and glanced at Mr. Rucastle to find her eyes fixed upon me with a most searching gaze. She said nothing, but I am convinced that she had divined that I had a mirror in my hand, and seen what was behind me. She rose at once. "Jephro," she said. Said she, "There's an impertinent fellow upon the road there, who stares up at Miss Hunter." "There's an impertinent fellow upon the road who stares up at Miss Hunter. No friend of yours, Miss Hunter?" he asked. "No, I know none of it. No, I know no one in these parts." "Dear me, how very impertinent. How very impertinent. How very impertinent. How very impertinent. How very impertinent." Kindly turned round and motioned to him to go away. Surely it would be better to take no notice. No. We should have him loitering here always. Kindly turn round and wave him away like that. I did as I was told, and at the same instant, Mrs. Rucastle drew down the blind. That was a week ago, and from that time I have not sat again in the window, nor have I worn the blue dress, nor seen the man in the road. "Pray continue," said Holmes. "Your narrative promises to be a most interesting one." "You will find it rather disconnected, I fear, and there may prove to be a little relation between the different incidents of which I speak. On the first day that I was at the Copper Beeches, Mr. Rucastle took me to a small house which stands near the kitchen door. As we approached it, I heard the sharp rattling of a chain and the sound as of a large animal moving about. "Look in here," said Mr. Rucastle, showing me a slit between two planks. "Is he not a beauty?" I looked through and was conscious of two glowing eyes, and of a vague figure huddled up in the darkness. "Don't be frightened," said my employer, laughing at the start which I had given. "It's only Carlo, my mastiff. I call him mine. really old Toller, my groom, is the one man who can do anything with him. We feed him once a day, and not too much then, so that he is always keen as mustard. Toller lets him loose every night, and God help the trespasser who lays upon this farm. For goodness sake, don't you ever on any pretext set your foot outside the threshold at night, for it is as much as your life is worth. The warning was no idle one, for 2 nights later, I happened to look out my bedroom window about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a beautiful moonlight night, and the lawn in front of the house was silvered over, almost as bright as the day. I was standing, wrapped in the peaceful beauty of the scene, when I was aware of something that was moving under the shadow of the copper beeches. As it emerged into the moonshine, I saw what it was. It was a giant dog, as large as a calf, tawny tinted, with hanging jowl black muzzle and huge projecting bones. It walked slowly across the lawn and vanished into the shadow upon the other side. That dreadful sentinel sent a chill down my heart, which I do not think that any burglar could have done. And now I have a very strange experience to tell you. I had, as you know, cut off my hair in London, and I had placed it in a great coil at the bottom of my trunk. One evening, after the child was in bed, I began to amuse myself by examining the furniture of my room and rearranging my own little things. There was an upper old chest of the drawers in the room, the 2 upper ones empty and open, the lower one locked. I had filled the first 2 with my linen, and as I had too much stuff to pack away, I was naturally annoyed at not having the use of the 3rd drawer. It struck me that it might have been fastened by a mere oversight. So I took out my bunch of keys and tried to open it. The very first key fitted to perfection, and I drew the drawer open. There was only one thing in it, but I am sure that you would never guess what it was. It was my coil of hair. I took it up and examined it. It was of the same peculiar tint and the same thickness. But then the impossibility of the thing obtruded itself upon me. How could my hair have been locked in the drawer? With trembling hands, I undid my trunk, turned out the contents, and drew from the bonhomme my own hair. I laid the 2 tresses together, and I assure you that they were identical. Was it not extraordinary, puzzling as I would? I could make nothing at all of what it meant. I returned the strange hair to the drawer, and I said nothing of the matter to the Rucastles, as I felt that I had put myself in the wrong by opening a drawer which had been locked. I am naturally observant, as you may have remarked, Mr. Holmes, and I soon had a pretty good plan of the whole house in my head. There was one wing, however, which appeared not to be inhabited at all. A door which faced that which led into the quarters of the Tollers opened into the suite, but it was invariably locked. One day, however, as I ascended the stairs, I met Mr. Rucastle coming out through this door, his keys in his hand, and a look on his face which made him a very different person to the round, jovial man to whom I was accustomed. His cheeks were red, his brow was all crinkled with anger, and his veins stood out as his temples with passion. He locked the door and hurried past me without a word or a look. This aroused my curiosity, so when I went out for a walk into the grounds with my charge, I strolled round to the side from which I could see the windows of this part of the house. There were 4 of them in a row, 3 of which were simply dirty, while the 4th was shuttered up. They were evidently all deserted. As I strolled up and down, glancing at them occasionally, Mr. Rucastle came out to look at me, looking as merry and jovial as ever. "Ah," said he, "you must not think me rude as if I passed you without a word. My dear young lady, I was preoccupied with business matters." I assured him that I was not offended. "By the way," said I, "you seem to have quite a suite of spare rooms up there, and one of them has the shutters up." He looked surprised, and as it seemed to me, a little startled at my remark. "Photography is one of my hobbies," said he. "I've made my darkroom up there. But dear me, what an observant young lady we have come upon. Who would have ever believed it?" He spoke in a jesting tone, but there was no jest in his eyes as he looked at me. I read suspicion there, and annoyance, but no jest.